So hey friends, welcome to this week's video. Hopefully this is a shorter review because I'm just looking at webcams, but playing around with image quality and just needing an extra camera, I didn't want to buy a big DSLR, so I looked at better options for webcams since I've been rocking with either onboard webcams or a Brio that I got at the beginning of quarantine, and I wanted to see if there's anything better out there. That kind of brought me to this Obsbot Tinycam 4K that purportedly brings a lot of good features, but also tremendous better quality. So everything you'll see, unless otherwise noted, will be shot off of the Obsbot. So this guy right here is the Obsbot. It's also with the microphones on board with the camera itself, just so you guys get a long exposure to all of this stuff. But let's get into the specifications and then we'll come back talking about some of the cool features with this guy. The Obsbot Tiny 4K comes with a hardshell case for security. The USB-C connection and power cable are also included, and that's essentially it. Nothing fancy, just the cam and everything you need for connection and transport. The base has a USB-C connection as well as a power port if your computer can't power the camera through USB alone. Across my devices, the USB-C was all I needed and I haven't needed additional power. The bottom of the base has a rubber ring that helps you keep the camera from sliding around, but it's a bit dust prone. But for y'all that want a lower angle or your screen is simply too tall, this will be a great security measure so you don't have to worry about knocking it about. For those who want a higher angle or get it off the table, the base of the camera is also magnetic and comes with a magnetic mount to allow you to securely set the camera at a high perch. The magnetic hold also allows you to invert the camera, so if you want to get the camera off your table but still want that low angle, this will allow you to do that, which is a nice touch by Obsbot. And lastly, the Tinycam 4K has a cool privacy feature which points down and away from you when it's inactive, so no need for privacy cover here. So obviously with this guy, the best thing about it is this pan tilt features, because of the fact that it can track you wherever you stand, wherever you crouch. It'll slowly follow you so that you can stay centered and have a little bit more flexibility in how you're shooting. So I'm going to move around and set up this thing and show you that it does do a really solid job about following you in a more natural way. It's very centered. It's not really trying to overcompensate. And it'll follow you throughout the entire thing. Even if you try to escape it, it'll find you. See? Pretty solid. The tracking is extremely smart. It's a lot better than a lot of other pan tilt things that I've seen. So I'm really impressed with the performance here. I get it. Some of you are gonna ask, like, oh, what's gonna happen if you want to get off cam? Is it just gonna follow you? Obviously, if you want to go to the kitchen and get some coffee, or if you want to just escape the camera because you want people seeing you, you always have the option to shut it off, of course. But maybe you just don't want to, and you just want to take a break. You always have these gestures, and they're a little bit finicky. You have to get used to them. But once you get the handle of how far you need to be and what it does about that distance, it'll stop. See? So if you need to escape them, you can with the hand gesture. I will say that the hand gestures are a little bit finicky. They take some getting used to in terms of understanding the distance. But once you do, the lights figure it out, and you always get that going on. The other thing that they have outside of the stop, pan, and all that sort of stuff is they have a zoom. I'm going to try to do this again. Sometimes I'll fail, but boom. Is it going to zoom? Oh, yeah, it's zooming. Oh, he's gotten further away. But it will continue going through this cycle to figure out where you want. And you always pause it if you want to get closer in, kind of punch in a little bit better. It'll still follow you at this zoom level. You just won't have as much space, so it won't show that as well. But the punch in is nice. It gives you a lot of flexibility to show your framing and things like that. And if you ever wanted to actually just have these zoom settings punched in, or at moment's notice, the application will allow you to have some presets in terms of zoom and your framing and your colors and things like that. So you can always do that in the app, which we'll talk about later. But overall, I really like this feature. I do find that it's relatively performative. You just have to get used to how far you need to be to make this stuff work the way that you want it. So let's talk about how this guy looks compared to other cameras that I have on me, with the onboard mic from my Mac, the Logitech Brio that I have, and see how they compare to each other. So what you're seeing right now are the standard colors out of a 2018 MacBook Pro. This is what I'm using for my mobile setup, and a lot of people will be using in terms of webcams if they don't have an external one. I will say that Macs generally do built-in webcams better than the competition out there, so you generally get better quality as well as a lot of different features, especially on the new ones. But I don't have a new one on me, so this is what you guys have to see. But I will say that obviously the grain is going to be more obvious in these recordings, and the audio is not going to be as tight. But I think the thing that I've noticed with a lot of webcams that are built in is they do have this sort of exposure thing that it tries to readjust. So right now I'm well lit, but if I move in or move out, you'll notice that the room lightens or darkens depending on how I'm positioned. And webcams that are built in that don't have a bigger sensor and it doesn't have sort of movement in terms of the mechanism, it just can't adjust for that as well, and that's the reason why you get some of that behavior. While things may seem good right now, I do have two light sources helping front light me, because this is a really bright background. So if I change these, you'll notice I get a lot darker. This is going to be a big issue, especially for people that are of darker complexions, especially with lighter backgrounds during the daytime. You'll just lose a lot of detail and it'll silhouette out a bit. So that's the reason why it's really good to have light sources, but if you don't, you might want to invest in a better mic or camera setup. Obviously, you guys have been listening to the standard MacBook microphones, so definitely let me know how that sounds. But let's move on to the Brio, because that's been my setup for the past few years before I started looking into other webcams. So moving on to the Brio, this is the microphone that you'll be hearing off of the Brio. It's a lot better. It's not as tinny. It has a little bit more detail to it, just because it has a lot more, microphone dedication inside of the device itself. Again, I still have the lights helping me light this, but you'll notice right away that this is a lot brighter. This is a lot more detailed, obviously because it's 4K, as well as the colors are a little bit more vibrant. I will say that this sort of out-of-the-box profile is a little bit saturated for my looks. I do feel like I look a little bit more Oompa Loompa-ish in the standard colors. I do tend to change that in the settings, so Logitech does have an app that helps adjust this. You can adjust your framing, you can adjust your color profile and do all this other stuff. So I do end up needing to change it just to make it less saturated, a little bit more real, bring out some of the contrast and things like that. But overall, for a lot of people, I think this will be great out of the box. However, I will say that 4K rendering is a little bit strange. I don't tend to use this for streaming, and I don't tend to use this for recording either, just because it doesn't render really well in recordings, as well as it doesn't seem as 4K as I'd expect. It's a very expensive camera, price up here, and I'd expect better 4K performance out of it. And I think when people started getting into like quarantine life, they definitely, a lot of people picked up this. It was hard for me to get this freaking webcam, but I did want to look better on camera. So this is something I highly pursued, and once I got it, I was a little bit disappointed of the quality, but it was like the best thing that we had at the time. But there's a lot of more options. But before I move on to that, I do want to do a couple more tests. Again, we were talking about how the space between you and the computer can change the exposure. So if I look at this, it does some slight changes, not as egregious as the built-in camera, but you can definitely notice that it gets a little bit brighter as I get closer, and then it tries to adjust. So I'm going to shut these lights off so you guys can see low light performance. And as you can see here, it does a little bit better at bringing in some details and leveraging the backlight of the camera or the screen to bring out a little bit more, make you look less silhouetted, especially if you are of darker complexion. If I come closer to the screen, it definitely brings it out more. It kind of explodes out the background there. However, if I'm at a normal distance, this isn't too bad. Obviously, it's not ideal, but definitely something that is workable. Again, not for recording or streaming, but just in general, doing calls and things like that. If you don't have external sources, shouldn't be a problem. But let's go over to the Obsbot and see if we get any improvements. All right, so moving on to the Obsbot, obviously it's a much different, cleaner, more neutral visual that you're looking at here. In terms of the colors, I think it's just a lot more natural looking, a lot more neutral. I'm not looking at over sharpening, over contrast, over saturation. It looks very real. Obviously, the room around me is a little bit darker than what's being presented here, but obviously with the camera, you kind of want that from a webcam experience. From a streaming and recording perspective too, the colors and the control of the image is making this a lot more usable, as well as the wide frame. You have a lot of real estate here. It doesn't feel like your face is super sucked into one place. So it's really nice to have that. Obviously, you have your zoom capabilities to make you have that ability to punch in if you need to. However, overall, I do like the fact that it does give you breathing room, so the image doesn't look so claustrophobic. It's just a lot more natural feeling. It's more relaxed, and it's just nice. Obviously, you can change this in the settings if you want to make this a little bit more controlled, so you don't have to do like sort of a variable zoom. You can create presets. We can show you that later in the review. But overall, I think that this is performing very nicely. The actual sensor itself also does a good job at capturing light, and it also keeps the image extremely solid in terms of consistency. So like we saw in the previous samples, if I move forward or back, you don't see tremendous amount of change. Actually, it's basically stays the same from what I can tell. You're not seeing changes in lighting. You're not to illuminate the face. It's really just sticking the same. And especially because it has pan tilt functionality, it'll follow you and give you that consistency. Obviously, you gotta make sure that it's synced to your face, but once you get that in there, it will pan and tilt towards you, keep you centered, give you all that headspace. And again, that headspace can be changed within the app later, which we can show you. But it does give you all of that flexibility that you'll love from this camera. But since we talked about all of that, let's turn off these lights and show low light performance. So from this perspective, you can see that there's still a lot of detail. It's really nice. It's still pretty bright. It's doing a lot better processing than the other cameras in terms of bringing out details, bringing out colors, and it doesn't just look like a giant silhouette. The Brio did a little bit better than the onboard camera, but you'll see here that the browns in my skin are still being able to be seen. Everything is very, very, natural. It doesn't look like it's over processed. It still looks relatively nice. Obviously, having external lights that'll bring some foreground light to you will make your image better. But if you're in a pinch and have to be in a darker setting, this will still look really, really nice. And the image is solid. But let's talk about how we can adjust this camera to suit your needs a little bit more tightly. This is the Obsbot Tinycam app. This is how you're going to get the customizations and things that you want from the camera. This is where you have to download onto your computer. This is also where you get all your firmware updates. So very important for you guys to have this application to get the latest and greatest from Obsbot. Keep your camera up to date. Overall, the basic stuff that you can get a hold of is the actual tracking of it. If you want to lock it and don't want to use the gesture that I showed you before, you can lock it manually. So, also, you can adjust the zoom again if you don't want to be gesture-based and you want to be a little bit more pragmatic on how you want to do this. It'll hold. And again, if for your positioning, you can create various presets to help you along with that. The good thing about here is I just went through that zoom and I'm kind of out of frame. So what I want to do is I'm going to bring that down a little bit more, and I can do some manual adjustments to make this ideal for what I'm working with. Since I'm showing you guys stuff and I don't want to get overridden by it, I can just move it from that perspective and it'll try to lock at that. So it's nice the fact that you can change that, and again, always you can lock it and have those preset positions so that you don't have to continually dial this back in. As we get into the settings of the actual application, let me just make sure that's not showing. Let me show that on a quick change. Settings, perfect. And let's expand this guy. This is, again, where it's going to be very important for you guys to have your firmware up to date, make sure that you can change the settings on this application, as well as change the settings on your camera, and make sure that you can do anything that you want with it, which we'll show you later. You will need this firmware to be in the latest one to actually change a lot of the image quality perspectives here. Again, you can put auto sleep. So again, if you're idle, you can change the time frame to just go down. So basically, go to sleep. It'll block off the camera so no one can see you. That's always really nice, especially if you find yourself on Zoom calls a lot. You might forget to deactivate your camera. This one will help you make sure that's locked. The two ones that I talked about with the gesture control, some people don't like to do that because they do talk with their hands, and it does pick up some of that stuff. So I've seen people deactivate these two gestures just because they don't want to, you know, accidentally zoom in their face, or disactivate pan, tilt, and zoom. So that's on your record. I personally like having them, especially if I need to move around. So it does help a little bit. Zoom form factor, that's just going to be how much it zooms with your control. So you can actually bring that all the way to 4. I had it capped at 2 because I don't want it to zoom in all that much. I'm not going to be too far from it, but you can put a cap zoom. So when I showed you that gesture before, it was going between 0 and 2x, but you can make it go all the way to 4x if you're going to be further away from your camera in the future. Tracking mode, this is where you got to figure out how much you want. Standard mode is just what you see right here. Headroom mode will give you a little bit more in terms of space here. And some people like to just really focus on motion. So if you're going to be moving around a lot, you might want to be on motion mode. So that's just if you want it to be reactive a little bit more to you moving around and things like that. But otherwise, standard mode will fit most people. Again, if you want more headroom, definitely has that option. Camera settings we'll get into a little bit later. Camera mode, landscape generally is what you'll be using. But again, maybe you're using this to shoot reels or shorts or TikToks. You can go into portrait mode, which I don't want to do because it's going to reboot everything. So we're not going to do that. But if you want to use this to shoot those sort of short form videos, you can definitely do that. Noise reduction is always good to have, just, you know, to make sure that the image quality is like not grainy. Hotkeys, if you care about it. Remote control, I don't really care about it. Language, all that sort of stuff. You can force a firmware update here, but you can also grab it usually from here. If there's a firmware that needs to be, they'll tell you, you can click the update button. But if you want to pull up a particular firmware, you actually have the ability to, you know, side load that and then get a previous version or the latest version if it's not functioning through the regular means. But again, standard application stuff, a little bit of gesture control here. The big thing that you guys are probably going to care about are the camera settings here. So let's definitely talk about that. All right, so let's talk about what we can change in terms of like colors and camera settings and things like that. So you do have an ability to do HDR. HDR generally evens things out a little bit more. So if I take it off, you'll see that it takes out some of the color there and takes a little bit more of that dynamic range out there. But if you add it on, I think it just makes things a little bit more neutral, looks a little bit nicer to my eye. From the focus perspective, you can have that focused in there. You can have it focus on your face all over, things like that. I don't think that I care really much about this one. You can make it, you know, fixed if you need it to be. So if you really want to stay at a certain plane, for sure. However, I think for most people, auto will be working out just fine. Let's see, exposure. This is where people might want to finagle a little bit more. So we can take that off. Obviously, this is the lowest setting, 133 shutter speed. We can bring that up if we need to, you know, have a little bit more performative. Right now, it's like super slow, but if we need to have a quicker, it's going to bring down the light a lot. But if we want to, you know, do a nice balance, probably go 150, 160. Is that all right? And then from your ISO perspective, again, if you're a camera user, you should know like lower settings means it will be better quality, but it might not bring as much light in. And as you bring that up, you'll have a lot less quality, but a lot more light. So low light settings, you'll have a higher ISO. Ideally, you don't want to bring it up too high just because you want all that information to be retained. So let's try something like 700. Looks about clean. So white balance is always going to be subjective. Auto, probably a lot of you will probably use well. Again, this is just changing the color temperature. So if we just do 500 Kelvin, 5000 Kelvin, it's going to be a lot warmer. If we bring that up, you can adjust accordingly to what kind of color profile you're looking for. I tend to go cooler because it just generally brings out the natural color of my skin tone a little better. But again, if you go too cool, it might look like you're in the Arctic or that you're just missing a lot of sun. So, 5,000 or 6,500 is going to look a lot like everything's going to look really yellow. But if you bring it down to let's say a 3,500, it's about natural. It's pretty accurate of what the walls are like right now. So having that ability is nice. Let's see what the auto does. Auto makes it a little bit cooler. I wanted it a little bit warmer. So if you have a good understanding of color temperature, you can change that. But I think a lot of people in this image quality, this is where people will have a lot of fun playing around with what their quality is. So obviously contrast, if you want to have a little bit more neutral, flatter image, for sure. If you want to be really detailed, it's going to bring in the colors a little bit more, but obviously darken you up. So, figure out how much shadowing and things like you want from that perspective. Saturation, again, this is something that a lot of cameras do wrong. They just oversaturate it. Again, if you want to go for more black and white, or you can kill it altogether. If you want to go a little bit more sepia, halfway through middle. But I think a lot of people will be okay with the middle ranges. So to me, 48 looks really good right now. But if you want to go a little bit more sepia or and a little bit more neutral, 31 might be good. But this is all going to be dependent on how everything renders on your side. So let's do 47. And then sharpness, I don't really like playing with this, but you can. Obviously, this sharpness, you can see a lot more. It just basically hugs in the edges a little bit more, so it's a little bit less fuzzy, but you get a lot of grain coming in that may not be appealing in the image. So let's look at taking that away, take out the sharpness, get a little bit softer skin tones, things like that. So this all depends. And then hue, if you want to make me the Hulk, there's that option. Or if you want to make me, what's a purple thing? I don't know. What's a purple animal? If you want to make me a blueberry, purple berry. You can do that too if you want to make me look alien. But obviously you want to be somewhere in the middle to help you. It's going to depend on your skin tone. Generally, bringing a little bit of purple into my skin tone makes it look a little bit better, especially if there's things on the walls that are also purple. You're going to bring that out. But yeah, they give you full control over this. I probably don't go more yellow because I'm already Asian. But yeah, so playing around with the colors will definitely help in terms of getting the look and feel that you want from your image, especially if you're looking to stream or use this for recording. It might be extremely important for you guys to play with these settings, but you do have that capability. I mean, there's not much to complain about. This is an easy recommendation for this Obsbot 4K because it has such a nice quality. Everything looks really good. You can modify the image, you can put in some presets. It has gesture control and it has pan tilt zoom. So it will cover so much of your needs, whether you're recording, streaming, doing Zoom calls, whatever it might be. I think it got you covered. I will say that there's probably some camera companies out here, obviously it's not gonna be as good as a DSLR. If you have a capture card and all that sort of stuff to give you that 4K quality, obviously that's not gonna do it for this one. But again, it's not gonna have a pan tilt zoom. And the other ones that I've seen that potentially have better image quality are invite only. They're more expensive and they don't have a pan tilt zoom. They're just more like the Brio. So for me, this functionality that it provides with the combination of quality is just something that gives me so much flexibility. This is something that I could see, if as long as I'm bringing the case with me, I could bring and get some really easy shots. And in fact, in previous reviews, you guys have seen me use this already. You just didn't know. And then on streams, if I'm ever doing shots with Samika or Carter, if I need to get two faces in there, I've been using the Obsbot to get my face so that they're in higher quality, but at least they get my face in pretty solid quality. So if I need a second camera, this guy's definitely going to be one of my go-tos for sure. But it just works so well. It works so intuitively. Once you get the nuance of the gestures and everything, it's just so convenient, and it's just, I was super surprised. Again, the biggest qualm that I have for it is the fact that it is gimbal based. It's a little bit more fragile than some of the other webcams out there. So, if you're traveling and things like that, a lot of people I've seen travel with the Brio here, just because, you can fold it down, throw it in your bag, you don't really care about it. This one, because it has a little bit more fragile pieces with the gimbal in there, you might want to bring the case with you, but it's still small enough for you to carry all that sort of things together. It's just not as like toss in your bag sort of thing. So that's the only thing that I could say that's like a downfall for it. Otherwise, this thing got you covered. It's gonna be super dope. Again, the price is here. I believe it's $270, but it does go. I've seen it go on promotion a couple times on Amazon, so definitely check that out. I'll put links in the bottom so you guys definitely have a look yourself. But if you have any questions, please let me know. Again, I appreciate you guys for sticking around for the entire review. I know this is a little bit more casual because, I mean, I can't really take this to the field and things like that, but hopefully you enjoy me infusing other things outside of just headphones. But if you have any questions, definitely let me know down below or any of my socials. But as always, please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, doing all the things that you normally do on a video that you like and love. And I'll see you shortly with a new one. As always, appreciate you.